and thank you for joining today's webinar all about designing healthy hotels. My name's Eloise Hanson. I'm going to be your host for today's session. I'm the editor of Boutique Hotel News, and we are an online B2B publication serving the global boutique, lifestyle, and luxury hotel industry. So this session, we have Cvent on board as a sponsor, and Cvent is a meetings and event technology platform, and we have a short video to play for you today. If you'd like to learn more about Cvent, there's some links in the chat there which you can follow up with. Now, to give you a brief rundown of how this webinar is going to flow today, we're going to spend around 45 minutes chatting to our Trailblazers, with some time at the end to take any questions from the audience. So I'm going to call on those that are tuning in live right now. If you have any questions for any of our panelists today, please submit these using the Q&A function, and I will get round to these as and when. And as a gentle reminder, this webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out to all those that have registered within a few days. We also have Duve on board as a sponsor for today's session, and Duve is a guest management platform. And once again, we have a short video to play for you. And if you'd like to learn more about Duve, then please find their website details in the chat there. So now I'm going to hand over to our Trailblazers and allow them to introduce themselves, as I'm sure they're going to do a much better job of that than I could. So I'm going to move from left to right as per the PowerPoint slides, which means, James, I will kick off with yourself, please.
Thanks very much, Eloise. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is James Ritz. I'm an architect and director of Bricks and Architecture. We specialise in low energy design, and we split that in the office, particularly between new low to zero carbon new buildings and predominantly on retrofits as well. So that's working with existing buildings and bringing them up to suitability to last for the next 20 to 30 years, and when meeting net zero climate targets in 2050.
Fantastic. Thank you, James. And Manish, I'm coming to you next, please.
Hi, good evening, everybody. This is Manish Puri. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Pareto Head. It is a hospitality company out of Bali. At the moment, I'm looking after 2 hotels and a beach club. I've been in hospitality, worked with hospitality for about 28 years. With about 7 or 8 companies and being part of opening of 6 great hotels. Lovely to be part of this forum.
Thank you, Manish. Appreciate you taking time out of your evening, being based out in Bali. So thank you for that. And last but not least, Anne-Marie, over to you.
Thanks, Eloise. So my name's Anne-Marie Aguilar. I'm the Senior Vice President for the IWBI, which is short for the International Well Building Institute, and we are the guardians of the well building standard. I represent the EMEA region, And just to give you a little background, we initially launched WELL back in 2014. WELL is the first roadmap for buildings and organizations to really focus on spaces that deliver human health and well-being. So really the first building rating system focused on occupant health. The roadmap includes strategies that are backed by scientific research that really aim to kind of understand both design interventions, operational protocols and policies that can foster a culture of health and wellness.
Brilliant. Thank you, Anne-Marie. And I'll flag here that all the LinkedIn profiles of our speakers have been popped into the chat, and I do encourage you to connect here. So if this is the first time that you're tuning into one of our webinars, I always like to run through some context to help set the scene. And COP27 actually kicks off today, and it does look like one of the main talking points of that summit is going to be on the implementation of carbon reduction initiatives. And I know that the United Nations has said that progress on cutting emissions has been, quote, woefully inadequate since COP26 last year. And these headlines on this slide is really illustrating how this is starting to take shape within hospitality. Top left-hand story here, we've got the Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, which has just relaunched its Hotel Carbon Measurement Initiative, which is a free tool for hoteliers to measure and monitor their carbon impact. And on the consumer side, we have Booking.com, which has partnered with Choose, which is a climate tech company, to inform travelers about the carbon implications of their trips. And the other screen grabs on this slide are actually interviews that either myself or my team members have published. The bottom left story, or I should say webinar, my colleague George Sell recently hosted. It's about how to make cities work with nature. And the Right To podcasts explore the transition to and achieving net zero carbon status. On the next slide, these are headlines taken from other media sources, and me and my panelists today were just speaking before we went live about the WELL and LEED crosswalk certification. I think I've said that right, Anne-Marie. But the International Well Building Institute and the US Green Building Council have announced a partnership to launch a dual certification. LEED, I understand, is a US-based certification. WELL has also partnered with BREEAM, which is mainly focused on the UK market. So if you want to hear further information, again, I encourage you to pick Anne-Marie's brains on this a bit later on. But jumping over to the far right-hand story on this slide, the headline reads, "The future of the built environment is healthy buildings and an inclusive workforce." And it's argued in this article that retrofitting an asset has several benefits, and these can include increasing worker productivity, improving tenant satisfaction, you can save on operating costs, and all of this will ultimately impact the value of an asset or the value of that real estate. So with that in mind, let's talk about designing healthy hotels. And I think it would be worthwhile to kick off the conversation with Anne-Marie and ask what actually constitutes a healthy hotel.
Thanks, Eloise. You know, it's a really interesting question, because as we can see from what's happening in the world today, post-COVID, you know, we have definitely seen a rapid change in what constitutes a healthy building. And we're really keen to kind of explore that type of conversation with our stakeholders and really help them understand what constitutes this type of building. And one of the key areas that we focus on is we have 10 concepts within WELL. So we, just to kind of capture a few that are quite different than what a building would look at in terms of sustainability, we would be looking at things like the air quality most importantly, we would look at the quality of the water delivered to the space, not in terms of reducing the amount of water, but actually ensuring that that water has the qualities and the characteristics of safe drinking. We would be really careful to start analyzing what's the impact of human health inside a building that has artificial light. How does that actually configure our sleep-wake cycle, and how can we improve that for folks who are spending, upwards of 90% of their time inside buildings? We obviously look at the main core areas that you would think would be really important, things like thermal comfort and acoustics. But we also then look at what's the food that's actually served inside the building. How do we get people from what's typically a very sedentary behavior into moving around the space? And then I think what's been really important for us is we focus on 3 areas that I have not really seen building rating systems focus on before. One of them is called mind, and that's really the topic that seldom gets spoken about, but luckily now it's becoming more and more of an open dialogue, is what's the built environment's impact on our mental health? How do we use areas like biodiversity and biophilia and views to the outdoors to actually have an impact on humans' mental health? The last category really focuses on community, and that's where the Well Building Standard really helps support HR policies. Again, trying to unite just not the design and construction elements of the building, but how does that building get maintained with the interaction with the people that work there? So really bringing HR into the discussion. So a quite unique opportunity that I've always felt brings 3 often siloed parts of a company together. So corporate or real estate part, which captures your architecture and your engineering, your HR, which deals with your policies and protocols. And like you mentioned on the previous slide, this, addressing equity, inclusivity, and diversity. And then the third area, which often gets left behind until a building gets handed over, is the facilities management piece. So imagine bringing those 3 stakeholders together to try and talk about what is the optimum use of a building and how can we make sure that ongoing it's maintained in the way that it's been designed.
Mm-hmm. And seeing as IWBI, it has, the frameworks and the guidance and the certification in place to help building owners, managers to embark on this journey. I mean, are you seeing greater demand for this type of product, the certification, and where is that demand coming from? And are you able to highlight any sort of ROI when undertaking such a step?
Well, I mean, COVID really brought to the surface this new level of awareness. So the beginning of 2020, I think we had close to 1 billion square feet of property going through registered or certified within the Well Building Standard. Very quickly, within 18 months, we went to 4 billion square feet across 125 countries. So just that rapid 4 times project certification made most of us realize that this is something that's not going away. This has now moved that indoor air quality discussion from a nice to have to a must have. So for us, the ROI has been really evident. It really starts to talk about reduction in absenteeism and sickness. We also see higher productivity, higher cognitive performance. And what's been really important for us is to see folks really keen to come back to work and come back into the spaces that they used to work. And also for hotel occupants to really see people excited to come back to the hotel world and travel and be able to experience this type of benefit. So I think the ROI for us is not only the sort of reduction in sickness and absenteeism, but also creating some transparency around these buildings. And what's been happening inside the buildings is giving folks that travel and guests a level of comfort and security that the buildings that they're going to, the hotels and the vacations that they're organizing, are actually monitoring and improving the indoor air quality that are provided for them.
Anne-Marie, I know later on we're going to be talking about the sort of the tools that are available to measure, track and report on these types of things. And I can see that we've got a question already from the floor, but what I'll do, Anne-Marie, is I'll come back to that later on, if that's okay. So
Great.
Richard, I see you, I hear you, we will get round to that later. James, I'd like to come to you next, please. I touched earlier on the COP27 climate summit has kicked off officially today. And I read somewhere that if global warming is to reach no more than 1.5 degrees, emissions need to be reduced by 45% by 2030. So how can this be achieved within the built environment?
I think firstly I'd say it's a bit unfair to only give me a few minutes to answer that question, and I don't think it's going to solve everything what I say. But I think the main points to take away on that is that, and in particularly with regards to the built environment, and then specifically, I guess, looking at UK. The built environment is responsible for about 25% of UK's UK CO2 emissions. So that's a quarter of our budget, if you like. The next way to divvy that up is that if we're looking at 2030 or in fact 2050, which is when we've legislated to be net zero. If we look at the building stock that we're going to have at that point, 80% of that building stock has already been constructed. So we've already got it. So it's not. I mean, the easiest thing we could all agree on is build low carbon net zero new buildings. Like legislate for that, and that solved that. But that solved 20%. The trickier thing, and the bigger picture is looking at how to upgrade, renovate, reuse, and retrofit our existing building stock, particularly in the hotel industry, your existing assets, and getting those up to scratch. And that's a lot more. That's a lot more of a, I guess, nuanced, more involved task. So that would be the main thing to head for. Yeah.
I've recently held a couple of webinars myself, all about managing and operating historical buildings. So you can imagine how that retrofitting conversation certainly feeds into that, particularly as I would imagine most of those people that are tuning in today are very much sat within their own property. It's an existing property that clearly needs some upgrade to it at some point, given that there is some legislation coming down the line. So James, focusing then on your work as an architect, this need to reduce or offset the embodied carbon within these existing buildings, how is that now shaping your work?
So it's shaping our work as much as a practice. We've tried to take ownership on ourselves rather than wait for legislation. I mean, legislation is coming. I mean, but it's legislation, so it's very slow. Bear in mind, if the UK was legislated to have almost near zero carbon or new homes built in 2015 or 2016, and that legislation slipped and got packaged away. But again, taking that as a side example, it's initially just, I guess, taking ownership and starting the way that we approach designing for the future now. So I think, I guess that's that part. Looking at how to retrofit buildings in terms of from a historical context, I think what you said there is very correct. There's a lot of crossover. And that's another sort of side debate, a discussion that's happening in the industry at the moment, is to how you can retrofit and upgrade bring a building back so it's got longevity, but also respecting its character. But how you assess a building, is very much a lot more on the sort of the science and the science side of things. And so it's moving slightly away from architecture and looking at hydrothermal performance and the exciting bits like that. But that ties in beautifully well with historical buildings as well. So it's very much the same approach, whether you're sort of restoring or retrofitting.
So you could argue then effectively that the role of the architect is in many ways upskilling and perhaps learning more about the science behind healthy buildings and what that works. Maybe that is a webinar topic for a later conversation. Anne-Marie, I can see your hand up there. Come in.
Yeah, I just also wanted to quickly add to that, the discussion that one of the areas that we're really trying to focus on is this sort of pressure to put on the supply chain to reduce volatile organic compounds and material that off gases inside these rooms. So I think also for the first time, I see the opportunity for architects to really push that boundary and to help us clean up that supply chain, and really understanding when we try and seal windows for energy efficiency, what we tend to do then is sort of trap all those volatile organic compounds in the spaces that we're living in and resting in when we're on hotels. So really when we're at hotels, the focus to kind of really push that supply chain, number one, to be more transparent about what's in those materials. And number two, let's start to get rid of as many of those toxins and carcinogens as we can.
I know later on I'm going to be speaking to James about the supply chain and what's happening within the sort of design, procurement, development side of the industry. So hold that thought, Anne-Marie, and we will get around to that later. So Manish, let's bring you into the conversation here, because I know that at Desert Potato Head, which I believe is the resort in Bali, at the moment, there's a fantastic exhibition which highlights how the journey, I suppose, that the resort has been on towards becoming a net zero carbon. And that exhibition has actually prompted my question to you, in that what role do you think hotels and resorts have in educating their customers and leading that charge on sustainability?
Thank you for that. And actually, that it's called Journey to Nothing, and nothing being net zero. So it's a presentation we've made in the Singapore School of Arts, and it's all about a story of how we've trying to become carbon, a journey towards carbon neutral and journey towards net zero waste. But to answer your question, I think we have a lot of a big role. Hotels, resorts have a big role to play in society and community, because hotel and resorts have always been part of the social fabric of the community, and the community has looked up to us for employment, generating business, elevating the position of the locality. So it's just only natural, and thankfully hotels are changing the image which was being, indulging or creator of excessive waste, and now slowly moving to the path of circular economy and sustainable hospitality or regenerative hospitality. So, but the fun of doing this is just showcasing all the efforts that you make to our guests, to our community. Remember in the 90s and 200s, when hotels were being designed, you had the kitchens being brought up into the restaurants, a lot of show kitchens. What we are doing in Paredo Head, we are getting workshops, we are getting sustainability activations in the front of the house. So when guests walk around and see our efforts of sustainability in action, that's where they learn more about it. So our journey to nothing is a great example of zero waste. And we talk and we show people how we make be candles that we make out of old wine bottles, and we use cooking oil. We make plastic chairs. We're doing coasters. We're doing. I have samples of this, and maybe later in the show I'll give you a little peek of what we do. All our chairs in resorts rooms are made of plastic waste. So all these little workshops are either we engage our community, our guests and guests that are staying with us, and make it a great experience that is a great learning for them.
Mm-hmm. I think it's also important as well to share the mistakes that you make along the way, maybe what worked, maybe what didn't work, because something that I've learned from having these types of conversations is that it needs to be a collaborative approach. At the moment, I think journeys towards achieving, it's the same goal, but it's a very fragmented path that we're all walking. So anything that can help in terms of highlighting the goods and the bads could also effectively prevent any greenwashing that is quite a big topic as well in the industry. To stick with you, oh please carry on, Manish.
No, exactly right. I think there's a lot of greenwashing in our industry, sadly. But once you're in the front of the house and you're really involving and engaging the community and your guests and telling them how it's actually made, and not somewhere in the back area or somewhere out of the hotel premises, but if they want to participate in these experiences, then the greenwash really goes away, and people get to see that you're actually involved in these great experiences.
So what additional skills then do you think are needed to actually manage and operate a sustainable, healthy resort? Again, this question was prompted from another conversation that I had, also head of operations for a UK portfolio. And she happened to mention that one of the challenges that she faces is actually educating and training her staff on ESG and what's needed in order to reach a certain status or criteria. So as the chief
certainly is not, in an operational world in hotel, it's not easy. I think the skills is passion and persistence. I think our mantra is basically good times do good. So it really starts from the top. And when our sustainability goal is net zero waste to landfill, carbon neutral business models. So what we do is we keep on talking about our sustainability goals and values on a daily basis in meetings, in forums, and in briefings, engaging with employees and guests. For example, during our check-in process, which is pretty efficient and quick, and we take them to a circle store, and we talk very briefly, have a narrative about our sustainability efforts. But we also hand them recycled plastic bags and stainless steel water bottles, and take kind of a pinky promise from them, saying that please do, single-use plastic bags and bottles are not allowed in our space. And now that we're giving you these things, there's no excuse for getting in. In fact, we don't allow any time when our guest walks into our hotels and our beach clubs, we see what they get in, and if there's any single-use plastics, we keep them aside, and it's not allowed to be brought into our beach clubs. So that's there is a lot of persistence. There is a lot of education involved, And the same efforts that we take on sustainability, we share it with our neighboring hotels and the community on a regular basis. They don't have to pay for the tours that we do. And there we create that excitement within the community.
Thanks, Manish. Anne-Marie, over to you.
Yeah, I just thought that was such an interesting question that you just posed, Eloise, that the idea that, you know, sometimes the challenge is how do we communicate both to the staff and to the visitors exactly what's been done in a building. And in the middle of 2020, we launched a program called the Well Health Safety Rating, and we had immediate uptake from the hospitality industry. And the reason why I think that was so well received was because it basically allowed a building to have a decal on the front door with a QR code. And it allowed anyone coming in and out of that building to be able to quickly scan the QR code and see, you know, a very small 22 features that were critical to getting someone back into a building after COVID. So it dealt with things like air and water quality, HR programs, emergency preparedness programs, sanitization options, and it could give people this really quick indicator like, wow, this is what this building has done. It would pretty much be invisible for me to detect that. But having the ability to communicate with the building gave me, and, you know, so both the visitors and the staff an opportunity to really connect with what those protocols were. So I thought that was an interesting way to make that connection so people could really see and understand what's been done.
Whilst I'm
I mean, seeing is believing. I mean, I don't know anybody who's seen the facade of a beach club. The facade is made of old Indonesian shutters, which were upcycled and collected from junkyards and old houses which were being broken in Indonesia. So we have thousands of these shutters, and which has become a facade of the building. And it's actually made it iconic. It is an art piece. It talks a lot about sustainability and upcycling and on our way to a circular stance or economy. And, you know, it's one of the most iconic buildings or most clicked buildings in Bali, perhaps.
Wow.
So your this thing was earlier, how do we educate it? Seeing is believing. And if you actually show it to your guests and your community, that actually it works. And, you know, there is a lot of wealth in waste. It's how you use it and create wealth out of it. That's the fun part. And it becomes so, at least for me, because I've been working in different hotels which have been deeply into sustainability, it becomes a passion. It becomes, because you're doing something good out of nothing at all, and then requires a lot of creativity, innovation, and this gives a different spin in hospitality, which gets boring sometimes, but it just gives a different spin. And you know, sustainability and wellness for the last decade has been the buzzwords in hoteliering. And that is why there is a lot of investment being made. And just going back, Eloise, sorry, I'm taking a bit of time on that. When we talked about accreditation. Thankfully, I've opened about 5 or 6 hotels. More and more owners, and not only the hotel operators, are asking for certification. What in our world, I think what is most recognized is the American certification of LEED. But this is something that I've seen the change not only on the operators. Obviously, there is a cost involved in LEED certification, but I think the operators, the hotel owners also have started to take deep interest in this.
To jump to Richard Beckett's question, which is in the Q&A, he's asked if there's a recognised certification or registration scheme for hotel products that are claiming to be sustainable. I know a couple of suppliers, Richard, one of which is MindClick. I believe that is like a tech company that effectively verifies products and textiles and materials, the origin of these and how sustainable they are. Another one is provenance. And I know that can be used on the toiletry side, so sort of tracking and mapping ingredients, the origin source, how they were sourced, as I suppose third-party tools that you can use to check and verify hotel products. But Anne-Marie, coming to you next for this question about actually measuring the impact. As I think it's somewhat linked to what I was just talking about. Hoteliers do find it hard to measure the impact of certain initiatives at property levels. So how can this process be made easier? What are the solutions and tools that are available? And if you want to sort of build on my response to Richard's question there, please go ahead.
Yeah, I do see the KPIs can be challenging. They obviously look different from property to property and organization to organization. But I guess the hospitality sector is about trying to keep a really loyal customer base when there's many options out there. So I think for us, it would be about telling the well story, understanding that the KPIs that would be measured in your building would be around air quality, water quality, lighting and acoustics, and not just doing the measurements and walking away, but talking about what the value is of measuring these important KPIs and tying them back to a health outcome, I think has been really fantastic. It helps clients understand why these things are important and why you as a hotelier would think that it's important for the health of your guests. The other area I think we've seen real progress is the sort of pre and post occupancy surveys, which really help understand if the sort of the methods that you've been deploying are actually landing well. And I think that's an incredible way of taking the pulse on what's important and what your guests can see from the spaces that they occupy. But I think if you don't really tell folks that you're doing it, it becomes really challenging for them to see what goes on behind the scenes. And I think it goes kind of back to the whole greenwashing discussion, which is that, you know, the proof of certifications, as much as they would have a cost implication, is that they are transparent and they're backed by third party, which means that there's been real research to demonstrate why these benefits are important and what strategies have been identified to deliver them. And I think it does help show a real sense of commitment from the hotelier that they've taken that additional step. And I agree that LEED and BREEAM and other sustainability tools have really become very well used across the globe because there's this need to show verifiable performance. And one of the other areas that we hold really dearly with WELL is that every certified project has to be recertified every 3 years, which means that you cannot just assume that building is actually performing the way it was designed. We're going to go in there and make sure that that air quality is still the same and that lighting and acoustics are performing in the way that they were designed.
When it comes to any discussion around healthy buildings, I do find that air quality seems to be the sort of the first on the agenda to address. I know there's been, again, discussions around, I believe, HVAC systems and how you can change and upgrade. I know especially during the pandemic, there was a premium put on having space, particularly outdoor space. Just so that we can touch on Richard's earlier question about water quality. Anne-Marie, would you be able to just highlight how the International Well Building Institute covers water quality?
Yeah, I had a quick response with Richard in the chat, but we definitely have a very serious protocol. We test for 38 different particulates inside the water that's coming into the building. And I think that one of the key areas for that is, again, to diminish the need for plastic water bottles. If we can do adequate testing on the water that's coming into the building, there should be no need for any plastic water bottles inside the space. So I think Richard's also focusing on Legionella, which is another area that we also have within our water treatment requirements to sort of diminish any potential for Legionnaire's disease or Legionella. So I have requested that if Richard's really keen to find out more about that, that he should come back to us within our technical scope, and we can talk through about the different types of fixtures that can promote that.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. James, we're here to talk about that supply chain. I know it's been pretty tough. There's several factors all kind of building up to this pressure point around the supply chain. And I've seen that particularly on the hotel project development side that plans have temporarily stalled. This could be for various reasons around the cost of goods, the cost of labor. I mean, we could go on, but from your point or from your perspective, what are the challenges that do surround the development supply chain, particularly when it comes to being compliant with certain sustainability standards and trying to be as healthy and eco-friendly as possible?
So I think some of the main challenges is communication and transparency. I think a lot of the points that Anne-Marie's touched on with the work that they do in terms of the well building and analysis, in terms I guess explaining and explaining very clearly and putting a value on a lot of the factors that don't get thought about, or quite difficult for architects to communicate at an early design stage. There's a lot just discussion in our side of the industry at the moment in terms of looking at the benefits, where you talk about the benefits of retrofit, and usually, so basically, it's often the benefit is this is how much it will save you. There's lots of then the discussion moves on to co-benefits, which being other things. Oh, by the way, it's going to be a healthier place to be, and more comfortable and nicer, and people are going to stay in there longer. But it's at that point, it's then trying to understand those are actual benefits as well. So I guess going back to the supply chain is trying to understand the moves that you make early on can affect those targets at the end. I think also the point that Manish was making about the facade of their beach club, I think it also becomes very exciting when you actually communicate and communicate with the products that you're using, what it is you're doing. It's clearly it's clearly recycling and clearly reusing, and then it becomes a lot interesting. They can quite quickly, if they're not talked about and communicated, they're quite easy to completely forget and pass by, and then the value is not put on them, I think. And again goes. Sorry, Anne-Marie, I was just going to say just another great point that you made was about reducing VOCs. And this again goes back into the supply chain of early on having an understanding of exactly what it is that you want to achieve in terms of sustainability and net zero, because that will help inform you when you're talking about what insulation should I use. Will it be a PIR which is nice and cheap and looks, or will it be a natural insulation like wood fiber, for example, that's going to take up more space? Because they're not things that you can add. They're not conversations you can have further down the line. So sorry, Anne-Marie, you had a point.
Please go on, Anne-Marie.
No, I was just going to jump on that discussion, James, because one of the things that we've seen, and I think Manish, you just pointed it out really clearly, is this use of like a local reused material, and like the feeling that gives someone when they're staying at a hotel that you've sourced something locally, it hasn't had a huge carbon impact. The story of those types of local used products, I think we can't really underestimate the impact that even has on mental health. Like there's a huge feel-good factor that happens when you see people doing the right thing. And even for us, we've noticed that in the whole discussion about biophilic environments, like looking at things like wood and natural textures, like there's a human response to being around materials that are much more natural. Like there's been studies done, and if you put someone in a room with plastic seating and plastic tables, there's a completely different human output than when you put someone into a room that has natural materials. So I think the more and more we see the evolution of products that can be reused, that tell a local story, that have a less unsustainable impact and reduces sort of carbon emissions. I think it just is a story that seems to send the right message to both the hotelier, the occupier, the people that really talk about this experience that they've had to others. It's a really good story.
It's not only about using local, items from the locality. It also helps the local community also to grow, because they're participating in the growth of the hotel or the residences or this thing. So you get closer to the community that way, and they feel that not all the resources are being taken away. You are also being participative in the generation of value in monetary terms. So I think that's very much part of regenerative hospitality, where even for food products, we're not looking out from, 20 years back, it used to be a great thing for a menu to have your oysters flown in and your smoked salmon flown in from different parts of the world, and your caviars and wines and all these things. Now it's basically farm to table concepts which have come in, and it's all about a sense of place and how we've been able to use the local ingredients, local community, local people and expertise to put that fish on your plate or put that meat on your plate. So I think very much part of sustainability and very much part of creating value to the great buildings that you've already put into place.
I think that's a great point in terms of travel distance. I know you're talking particularly then, Manish, about the travel of the food, but in terms of going back to the specifying buildings, when you're looking at finishes, or just internal finishes, or looking at upgrades of paints and fabrics, all of that, that's the time to look at the embodied carbon and actually again put a value on that, because specifying as local as possible is fantastic. I think the other side of this is the general day-to-day operations on the energy input of a property, and then so looking at that, I guess in terms of existing assets, certainly in the UK, we're experiencing a lot of issues with cost of energy at the moment, which is the only positive is it's bringing that to the forefront of people's minds, and in terms of tackling that, it's not a straightforward answer, but it goes back to retrofitting and looking at how can you reduce your energy costs, so your space heating demands for your building, and again, it's for that really the best advice is putting together a retrofit strategy that looks at the age of your building, and will tie in with any upgrades and refurbishment plans you might have, and then so knowing that when you're carrying those out, you have in place a plan that will upgrade insulation and increase air tightness, so that as your building grows and develops, it will develop in the right way, and you're not going back and doing any particularly abortive work just to become sustainable. It should happen naturally, and along with your general day-to-day building maintenance.
James, you highlighted earlier that there was a 2050 goal to become, I believe, net zero
carbon.
Yeah, I always get those terms mixed up or put them in the slightly wrong order. But do you think that in order to meet that goal, that further reform is going to be necessary? Does the industry need to be incentivized?
I think, yeah. I mean, yes is the answer. Where does that incentive come from? I think I mean, it's actually coming more and more, I would have thought, from the client and the user, rather than government is probably falling behind in a lot of spaces. I mean, certainly in the UK, this particular in the housing market, it's actually, legislation is struggling to catch up with people's aspirations. But unfairly, I mean, the incentive needs to come from everywhere. And at the end of the day, it's going to be on owner of the business, in the context of the hotel business, to lead that. And it's just, I think, unfortunately, at some point, I have to recognise meeting net zero as a requirement, and it's whether you choose to do that now or wait for legislation. And I believe it'd probably be far behind the curve if you do that.
Mm-hmm. And to close our conversation today, as we are quite fastly approaching 3 o'clock, I just want to ask a final question to Manish, because you focus a lot on sourcing local items and empowering that local community. And I know that Potato Head, either as a result or that was always your goal, to focus on regeneration. And I wanted to ask how the path towards becoming a more healthy, responsible, net zero business is actually empowering you, the team, and that community to think more creatively about how to achieve those goals.
So the question is, could you just repeat the question?
So
yes.
how is the path to act more responsibly, prompting the team to act more creatively?
Yeah, so as part of regenerative hospitality, if you just talk about menus, I think our menus have become seasonal because we're using seasonal products, because that's what's, we don't have to import items which are non-season. We just put it in the menus which are in season. So if you have 4 seasons or 5 seasons, then we rotate our menus 5 times a year. There's no more joy in giving employment and giving business to your local farmers and your local community that you support, because first of all, it reduces carbon footprints, and you're getting so much of joy in giving to the local community for support. And it just kind of tastes better. I think if it's less travel, it kind of tastes better. And we do have a lot of programs, and we do invite the rest of our hosts, our staff, into these initiatives. So I think, as I said earlier, it really starts from the top, and it becomes it becomes a passion. It becomes something that we really believe in, and because we engage with our hosts a number of times, a lot of times, I think it's just become a part of our DNA. And yeah.
Thanks, Manish. And I'm going to let our audience know that if you want to carry on our conversation, which I very much encourage you to do so, please connect with our Trailblazers online and ask those pressing questions that need to be asked, because as I mentioned earlier, I think this is a collaborative approach, and there's a lot of learning to be had along the way. But before we close off, I just have a few slides that I would like to run through before I bid you all farewell, and we can let Manish go to bed. But I would like to politely flag a couple of webinars that I'm going to be hosting over the next couple of weeks. one on the metaverse, which is on November the 21st, and perhaps one that's most relevant to the conversation we've had today about maximizing your assets value, which is on November the 28th. If you're interested in learning more, I would love to see you all back there. So please do register using the links that have been popped into the chat. And I'm super excited to be in Lisbon in late January for our next event called Recharge. And this is an event which every year moves to a different European city. And I've never been to Lisbon before, so any excuse to get me there is absolutely a winning combination. But you can see on your screens there the sponsored companies who will be in attendance. And if you would like to hear further information about any of our events or any of our webinars, then please do get in touch with my colleague Katie. Her details are up on your screens there. So all that's left for me to do today is say thank you to Manish, Anne-Marie and James for their insights. Thank you to Duve and Cvent for sponsoring. We're going to leave this webinar open for an extra 2 minutes to allow our audience to follow up on any of the links that have been popped into the chat. But otherwise, in the meantime, you can follow us on all the social media channels on your screens. If you simply can't wait for November the 21st, when I'll be back with my webinars. But otherwise, take care of yourselves, enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all very soon.